Like the kind of the doghouse.
Okay, so not that long ago, I made a video on 5 things that boxing could learn from the UFC, and as I stated in the video, I was going to make a opposite of that in 5 things that the UFC could learn from boxing. And today, here is the video because, funnily enough, so boxing gets a lot of it's a bad rap, rep from a lot of people. A lot of people say boxing's dying. They say that big fights don't get made, and so on and so forth. And I had an excellent year to its credit. I mean, we've seen Garcia and Davis. We've seen Spence and Crawford get made. We've seen Inoue and Fulton. Joshua Wilder's on potential on the cards. There's a lot of good fights this year for boxing, and I think it's beating the UFC at the moment. But that being said, there's obviously a lot in boxing that doesn't great, and we all know this. However, I think there's a lot that the UFC could learn from boxing. So here, now, remarkably, I think if you really delve into it, probably more that boxing could learn from the UFC. However, I did 5 things that I felt that that the UFC could, or that boxing could learn from the UFC. I'm doing 6 things today for what the UFC could learn from boxing, because the more I kind of delved into it, there's a lot more that I look at that I feel the UFC could do, maybe a little bit similar to boxing. So here is 6 things that I feel the UFC could learn from boxing. Starting off with the first one, and as I explained before, none of these are in order from best to worst. They're just in whatever order you want them to be in. First thing is sponsorship. Now, the UFC a while ago signed a deal with Reebok for the shorts on the UFC, and now they've got Venom on the shorts. And the UFC fighters on the roster can only wear the those shorts. They can't wear. Let's just say you're sponsored by Adidas. You can't wear Adidas on your shorts. You have to only wear the UFC attire, and that's killed a lot of fighters, because what that has done means you can't bring in money from the sponsorships. And if you remember a while ago, John Jones, when he fought DC, had like the EA Sports UFC and the EA Sports shorts for the game. I remember Dennis Seaver wearing having Monster or having Venom or something like that on his shorts, and fighters have had different things on them. It's just sponsorships that they can bring in. Some guys have had Monster Energy on their shorts. Guys have had different things for whatever sponsorship they're representing, or whatever sponsorship they've signed with. And this is a big thing in boxing. You can do it regardless. Anthony Joshua wears the Under Armour shorts. Seen recently, I've seen Boots Ennis and Spence having OnlyFans on their shorts, which they must pay quite a bit. And you see different fighters having different things on shorts. And for boxers, it's good because they can get in more money, and the shorts look cooler, to be fair, as well, from just a fashion point of view. So I think this is one thing the UFC could do. They're very boring, the normal shorts. It's literally just black, red, white, green, blue, whatever. The colours are, obviously, a lot of fighters, they do wear the colours of the flags, but I don't know. I prefer different. I like the idea of the champion wearing black and gold, but now they've even changed that, because now Adesanya, you see him wearing green and gold when he fought Poatan the second time around, the first time in MMA, or the third time technically. And I don't know. I prefer the multicolored shorts. I think John Jones' red shorts and DC had like a black and white and pink sort of ones when they fought. I think it's better. You get more money for the fighters. And fighter pays is obviously the one thing I could get into, but I'm not going to pretend like boxers are millionaires. Only select boxers make the amount of money that you could argue they should be making. But when it comes to it, I do believe that financially, boxing is a better route than MMA, because the UFC, they don't pay enough. You don't get money from the sponsorships, like I said, and the PFL, they pay a lot, but again, you need more for a fight. What you're committing to, the money you spend on training camps, there's got to be a lot more to it. So yeah, that's the first thing I'm going to say, sponsors. And now on to my second thing, what I feel boxing or UFC could learn from boxing: the walkouts. Now, I don't mind the UFC walkouts, but if you look at boxing, for example, let's take Anthony Joshua. He fought Alexander Usyk. As for the walkout, you remember, they obviously have the little promo on the screen, and then they cut to Joshua. His music plays. He walks out, but then he walks on. I think the fight was at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. He then walks to the front of like a little stage, and then there's like big like sparkles, almost like fire, that spell AJ on either side of him, and then he walks to the ring. Boxing's always had these cinematic entrances, and they look so good, you know. Tank Davis against Ryan Garcia coming out to Chief Keef, and then, you know, looking at what else we got. You got the likes of Floyd, who used to come out dressed as like a gladiator in the sombrero at times, and just these different things. And the UFC walkouts are so bland; they don't have any kind of personality. The only guy who does this is Israel Adesanya. You know, I used to like Usman. He used to dance to his walkout, which I thought was good. One time, I remember when McGregor fought Mendes, they had the Sinead O'Connor performing, but there's no personality to the walkouts. They're all the same, and I think the one thing about the walkouts in boxing, I don't know, it feels like it shows the personality of the fighters a little bit more. You know, even someone like O'Hara Davis, I remember when he used to walk out to the Undertaker's theme before Adesanya did it, and I don't know, just things like that. They create something, you know. Errol Spence comes out quite a few times to like different Texas rappers, and I remember, you know, you see Terence Crawford tends to come out to a lot of old school songs. So again, these things, they can kind of show the personality of a fighter. You know, Tyson Fury came out to remember against Wilder on the throne to Patsy Cline. So these things are important, and yet we don't see this in UFC. All we ever see is sometimes they might wear something, they might have a flag, but even now they've banned the flags because of what's happened in Russia. So I don't really, I don't know, they're just so bland, and I think Dana really needs to loosen up and be a bit more imaginative in what he's allowing here. Adesanya and Whittaker, a lot of people at the time didn't like it, but now that obviously Adesanya beat Whittaker, they talk a lot about the walkout, how much great it was, but in reality, a lot of it, I remember at the time everybody was calling it cringy, but you know, I liked it. It showed personality. This is what the UFC needs. It needs more personality. It's too boring at times, and I think the walkouts is a big thing. And in boxing, I always look forward to the walkouts. I mean, most people do. It's almost like the I'll be honest. Apart from the actual fight itself, it's probably my favorite part of any fight. To be honest, you know, if you look at the press conferences, you have the weigh-ins, you have the fight itself, you have the aftermath. The fight is the main thing, but then the walkouts are my second thing that I always look forward to. I rarely ever miss that kind of things. So yeah, I think the walkouts as the second thing I would say that the UFC really needs to do something there and be more imaginative and let these fighters express themselves a bit more. I think a lot of fighters would do that if they had the choice. Woodley, I've never been his biggest fan, but Woodley would have definitely had like Wiz Khalifa walk him out or something if he had the choice. Lord knows what McGregor would have done if he had the chance, you know. And I think he kind of showed this when Floyd fought Conor McGregor. In that fight, McGregor came out to his normal. They had the music playing, and he came out, and then they had the UFC belt, and Floyd came out with like a bank robber type mask on, and it kind of shows the UFC walkouts are very just dull. Boxings are way more exciting in my opinion. So I'd love to see something to do with that. So yeah. This one. And now on to my third one, and this is a not really a popular one and a bit of one that's outside the box, but when it comes to UFC pay-per-views, the pay-per-views, so example, right, in boxing, for Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia, the fight is billed as Garcia versus Davis. The thing that is used, the title of the pay-per-view is the two fighters. In the UFC, it's not that. In the UFC, next pay-per-view, for example, is Nunes versus Aldana. But that's not what the pay-per-view is called. The pay-per-view is UFC 289. They are using, obviously the way they do it is obviously they've counted down from UFC 1 all the way, in my opinion, to UFC now. Obviously, it's not my opinion. This is what they've done. It's a similar thing what they do with WrestleMania and WWE, and that's going to be a point I make later on here. But yeah, I wouldn't mind if they just I don't know, just lose the UFC to whatever ban. I understand they're not going to because they're counting wild on the line here, and they'll. I don't know how long it's going to take to get to UFC 1000, but when it does, yeah, it's going to go off. And with UFC 289, I remember when we were at UFC 200. It felt like not that long ago, but it was. You know, we're not that far from UFC 300, and these sort of things, obviously, they're big for the UFC. They can do special things, but I don't know. I much prefer it if they, just sort of just let the fighters have it. Khabib McGregor was the biggest fight in UFC history, and everybody remembers it for that. So it didn't change too much, but I don't know. I just would kind of like if they let the fighters come at the forefront instead of the UFC. Even though the UFC is the company, they're the ones who obviously make the fights. They're fantastic. A lot of the cards, sometimes they're a bit dull, but same with anything. They are the best mixed martial arts organization in the world, but I just feel that if you let the fighters take forefront, and in fairness, this isn't just UFC, Bellator do it, One do it. It's not just the UFC, I think PFL as well. But I don't know. I just prefer if they allowed the fights to take forefront as opposed to having the UFC 289, 291, 290, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, just not a big one to be honest, but just a small one. That's what I would prefer. So that is one point, and then going on to my next one, and this one is a big one. And I would argue if I was listing all these, this may be number one or number two. More weight classes. This, I can't explain how big this one is. Because in boxing, if we go through the weight class, not all of them obviously, but you have 135, then you have 140, then you have 147, 154, 160, and then 168. Now, those divisions, first of all, the main thing to know as well is the UFC weight classes are different to, or MMA weight classes in general, are different to boxing, 168 pounds is super middleweight, and if you can cross that to maybe 170, that's what it is. 170 is what the UFC have that is closest to this, and that's welterweight. Welterweight in boxing is 147, so it's different. But in the UFC, 135 bantamweight, but then you got 145, which is featherweight. Then you have 155, which is lightweight. Then you go all the way up to 170, which is the next weight class up, which is welterweight, and then 185. So it's like 10 to 15. There's a weight class every 10 to 15 pounds. And don't get me wrong, some fighters do fight well below their weight. Some fighters fight beyond their weight, but it's too much of a jump. In boxing, you want to go to 150. If let's say you're fighting at 154, which is a junior middleweight, and you want to go up to middleweight, it's 6 pounds to middleweight. It's nothing. I don't say nothing. It's obviously, if you're naturally 154, you got to gain the muscle. But for some fighters, that's not much. You see boxers, they don't like killing themselves to make the weight. But in the UFC, 155, which is like I said, the equivalent £1 difference to 154, is one weight class. If you want to go the weight class above, it's 170. Then it's way too big a jump to make. It's 15 pounds. So yeah. I really don't like this in UFC. I did an interview with Junior Morgan a while back, and he said the same thing about how there isn't enough weight classes. Even how the weight classes go. In the UFC, there's obviously bantamweight, then it's featherweight, lightweight, welterweight, middleweight. In boxing, it goes, you have bantamweight, then you have junior welterweight. Again, these weight classes, they have different names. Some people call it junior welterweight. Some people call it super lightweight. Whatever you want to call it. You have bantamweight, super lightweight, call it that. Then you got all light welterweight. Then you got welterweight. Then you got light middleweight. Then you got middleweight, super middleweight. There's every weight class essentially has a light or a super. There's no. Obviously at a certain point, from super middleweight onwards, there's no super light heavyweight or super cruiserweight. There's the heavier weight classes is where we don't have the differences, and that's how it should be because most of these guys are naturally very big anyway. So yeah, this is a big one. UFC forever has been talking about 165. They've not opened the weight class yet. They should do. Dana talks about how it will kill the 170 and 155 division. Eventually, fighters will come into all these divisions anyway, so I don't really see the issue. Open up on 165, open up on 175 and 185. I mean, 185 is already weight. But for more, I don't see the issue. I'll be honest with you. Doing all these things, I think it would make the UFC better. You would allow fighters to make the weight easier. You wouldn't have fighters killing themselves to make weight. Wouldn't have these guys almost falling over at weigh-ins and passing out. You wouldn't have guys looking like skeletons. There's just so much that you could do. And don't get me wrong, guys do kill themselves in boxing to make weight, but that is more down to them. It is not down to them not having enough weight classes. You look at someone, Kevin Lee's an example. He was, I feel, almost too big for 155, but too small for welterweight. I think 165 would be perfect. Darren Till the same. I think he was too big for welterweight, but too small for middleweight. If there was a one in between, it'd be perfect. And this is what I feel. And don't get me wrong, this type of thing can happen. David Haye, I felt, was too big for cruiserweight, but too small for heavyweight. You're never always going to find a perfect in between. But I think a lot more fighters would just have more success if they would more naturally at a certain weight. But yeah, more weight classes is imperative. This should be number one on the priority list, in my opinion, because getting paid for fighters is very important, but also the safety, I think, should be the most important. So yeah, I'm going to say I think that would be my next one. And I think it's very, very important in all MMA organizations, not just the UFC, that they act on this, because the more weight classes there are, the more healthy the fighters, and you don't have fighters complaining about all these different things, and you don't have fighters almost killing themselves, because one day, I think GSP said he feels like one day somebody will die from weight cutting, and I think this is going to help. I mean, this is seriously going to harm a fighter one day, and you don't want to be the one to be there. And I feel like this is what is going to happen, but I think what's going to happen is a fighter will have something really bad happen to them from weight cutting, and that may open the UFC and the MMA world's eyes to this. But because I don't hear it spoke about as much, I hear fighter pay being spoke about way more, and it's important, don't get it wrong, but I feel more weight classes is so important. So yeah, just what I feel though, and yeah, that would be it. And then the next one would be, now this is an intriguing one, to be honest, because it's going to sound very, very like I'm going at the UFC a little bit and a bit insulting, but I'm not. Be more serious. Now, what I mean by this, the WWE recently has been how do I explain this? They kind of been I forget what it was now, but basically WWE and UFC are essentially owned by the same sort of company and partner, and because of that, it does feel as if now the WWE and the UFC are almost crossing. It's almost as if there's a link between the two. Ronda Rousey, who obviously was a legend in the UFC, is now in the WWE. I don't know if she still is. Brock Lesnar, as we know, was a massive WWE superstar, came into the UFC, became heavyweight champion. And a lot of WWE guys, they do go into wrestling, into MMA. Jack Swagger, I remember doing the same thing. Batista at one point was partially doing a little bit of MMA, so there's a lot of guys that do it because naturally, they do. Even though WWE is not real in terms of the them literally hitting each other, but they do obviously perform certain maneuvers. Like there are some guys who I think genuinely are wrestlers in the UFC in WWE who could maybe transition to the UFC with their wrestling, but either way. The UFC is becoming, I think, a little bit like a TV show where you have personalities as opposed to, I don't know, I don't want to say real fighters because these guys are real fighters, they do train and what have you, but I just feel as if, I look at a guy like Colby Covington, he felt as if he needed to make noise so the UFC wouldn't cut him. In boxing, this wouldn't happen. Now, it's harder to get noticed in boxing than the UFC, admittedly, but I do think, you look at, there isn't a Colby Covington in boxing, there isn't one guy who is you essentially know he's put on a character. The only guy who really I look at and I think he kind of goes out his way a little bit is Rolly Romero is probably the one I think. I would say, maybe Tyson Fury you could say, but again, these guys are serious most of the time. It's just they go a little bit further to sell the fight, but they're not playing characters. Colby Covington is playing a character, and this character is being accepted. It's as if we're living inside a weird reality where the fighting isn't important, it's what you say. And being more serious, what I mean by this is you look at what is going to be a big fight this year with Crawford and Spence. These two are dogs, they're very, very serious, but they aren't trying to put on characters, they're not doing this, and yet you still got a huge fight. And I look at Jones and DC too, and I look at Khabib and McGregor. The two, in my opinion, the biggest fights in UFC history, neither of those, any of those guys was putting on characters or being fake. Even McGregor, people talk about, you know, him selling fights, but what McGregor was doing is what Muhammad Ali was doing, is what Floyd did. He's talking a lot of smack, but it's not as if he's putting on a character. He's doing this to get inside his opponent's head. Putting on a character and doing what Conor did. What Colby Covington does and what Conor McGregor does are two entirely different things. Because Colby Covington, we know, isn't completely genuine. Conor McGregor is, but yet people accept the Colby Covington thing and they don't find it cringeworthy or weird because, again, in MMA, it feels as if there is a link to WWE, which I don't like. These are fighters, and to me, again, maybe people like it. I just prefer not to have a WWE thing and actually to have it be more genuine. And if there's beef there, there's not fake beef, it's real. Nobody's putting on these characters. Chael Sonnen did it as well, and I don't like it. I think you don't need it in the UFC. You need more guys like Conor. You need guys who are genuine but have a bit of wit. That's what I feel sells. I don't think a guy like Colby Covington, while people say, you know, he's selling pay-per-views and making money, he's not as if he's a massive draw. You know, you can't go into America and I think any city and ask who Colby Covington is. I don't think many would come, or there'd be some who know him, but I wouldn't say he's a massive figure over there. So yeah, I prefer if they just didn't do this stuff. But, and for the record, I don't blame Colby Covington. He was about to lose his job. He took advantage of the system. Like he says, it's an entertainment business. It's not the fighting business, which is not how it should be. It should be the other way around. But, you know, he allowed CM Punk as well, Dana, to compete in the UFC. It feels as if they're just going for more entertainment and more the freak show stuff rather than actually being more serious with the fighters and having these guys. You know, another thing, it's not, I won't put it down, but, you know, they used to do like a little face-off. They used to do like Jones and DC did it with Joe Rogan where they were talking to each other, sat down. Dominic Cruz and I think Chito Vera did it one time recently, and Darren Till Masvidal do it in boxing. They don't always do it, admittedly, but it is something they do, and I like it. I prefer it to just a regular press conference. They do press conferences as well, obviously, but I just like it. It adds to the fight, and yeah, again, the realness is, I think, is what draws people, because you're not creating a storyline. The storyline is already there, and I think that's what, in my opinion, I just think the authenticity is what sells people. You know, Conor was being genuine. Masvidal on his rise to fame was genuine. And this is what draws people in, not the WWE theatrics, in my opinion. But we'll see if they continue at the end. I'm not really sure, but we'll see. Now, the last one. Big one that people are asking for, cross-promote. Now, UFC obviously is the main mixed martial arts organization, but you've got you got one championship, you've got PFL, and you have Bellator, as well as other ones like Cage Warriors and stuff like that. But they're the big ones, really. And I'd like it if they did more cross-promote. I'd like to see Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes. You've already got Ngannou, who's gone over to PFL again, and D'Elia is the champion. And I think that would be a fight that I guess they'll get it made. But yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see UFC do more cross-promotion. I think there's a lot of interesting fights out there that you could cross over with. I've always wanted to see Michael Venom Page in the UFC, and I think if you have him up against some of your guys, I think it'd be intriguing. You know, I would like if MMA didn't do just UFC 1, Bellator, like if they did different ones. Obviously, in boxing, you have the top ranks, you have the Matchrooms, you've got DAZN, Showtime. They all put on their own shows individually, but occasionally they do cross-promote, like, you know, when Floyd fought Manny, one on Showtime, one on ESPN. What else have we got recently? You could sort of put the Ryan Garcia and Tank one. It was sort of on DAZN as well as being on Showtime. There's a lot of cross-promoting going on in boxing, which is sometimes is an issue with fights, the whole side of the street nonsense, but most of the time it works and people are willing to cross-promote when the business is right, and that's what I feel boxing, I mean, the UFC should do. cross promote with other promotions, I don't think it'd be an issue. I think, you know, I'd love to see Mighty Mouse now up against the likes of Moreno and maybe Figueiredo. You know, and I think these fights would be interesting. I'd love to see Patricio Pitbull take on some of the guys. I just think there's so many intriguing matchups. Now, admittedly, I wouldn't say there's an abundance of talent in all these other divisions, or promotions. I do think someone like Brendan Loughnane would be interesting against some of the featherweights in the UFC. I think Kayla Harrison's probably the big one, I would say, but you also got Usman Nurmagomedov, who's another one. So there's so many others in these different organizations, and I would just like to see them all come over and do like these cross promotion fights. I think it'd be intriguing, and I think it'd get people interested, and it would be a good way to not just promote the UFC, but to promote MMA in general as a sport and having these type of things. Because again, boxing are not afraid to cross promote, but with the UFC and MMA, it feels like there's a bit of it's like dragging or scraping teeth almost to try and get these things happening. And I think it would be ideal. I don't put it massive on the list because I don't really mind them doing the different ones, but I would like to see them do cross promotions. But yeah, that's just my list though. The 6 things. Again, there's a lot of things that boxing can learn from the UFC, but I do think UFC has a lot to learn from boxing as well, as much as nobody wants to admit it. Like I said, the learning from boxing, I think, is massive for the UFC. I think having the sponsorships, the workouts, making it more exciting, losing the UFC banner, I think more weight classes, and I think being more serious as well as cross promoting, I think the UFC will be a much better thing with all those things in mind. But yeah, just 6 things though that I have on what I feel the UFC could learn from boxing. And yeah, until next time.